E.D. Nixon and other black leaders called for a one-day bus boycott. In some cities, it would have been impossible to organize 40,000 people in 2 days. But Black Montgomery had a core of activists in the Women's Political Council, and they distributed these boycott notices all over the city.
I called every person who was in every school and every place where we had planned to be at that, have somebody at that school or wherever it was at a certain time, that I would be there with materials for them to disseminate. I didn't go to bed that night. I cut those stencils. I ran off 35,000 copies.
But the bus passed right down in front of my house, you know, and I got up to see it, and several buses passed. I was late for work because I was trying to see how many buses was empty, and they were totally empty.
The one-day boycott was a success. That night, a mobilized black community turned out for a meeting at the Holt Street Baptist Church and voted unanimously to continue the boycott.
The preachers were preaching as I came in. I was about 2 minutes late coming in, and they were preaching, and that audience was so on fire that the preacher would get up and say, "Do you want your freedom?" And they'd say, "Yeah, well, I want my freedom. Are you for what we're doing?" "Yeah, go ahead, go ahead."
Overwhelmingly, I don't know if there was one vote that said, "No, don't continue." The people wanted to continue that boycott. They had been touched by the persecution, the humiliation that many of them had endured on buses, and they voted for it unanimously, and that meant thousands of people.
You see, when I first started fighting, I was fighting to keep so that the children who came behind me wouldn't suffer the same thing I suffered. Then the night of the bus boycott on December the 5th, I told the people that I had been fighting like that for all these years. I said, the night I changed my mind. I said, hell, I want to enjoy some of this stuff myself. And man, you ought to heard people holler.
The keynote speaker at Holt Street Church was a new preacher in town, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He was only 26 and was almost unknown outside his own congregation. King wasn't sure he should accept when his fellow ministers and other leaders asked him to head the new Montgomery Improvement Association and the boycott. But they wanted him in part because he was new in Montgomery.
Reverend King was a young man, very intelligent young man. He had not been here long enough for the city fathers to put their hand on him.
Martin said, well, you know, I'm not sure I'm the best person for this position since I'm new in the community. And, but if no one else is going to serve, you know, someone has to do it, and I'd be glad to try to do it. And of course, I guess everybody then assured him they wanted him. So he came home very excited about the fact that he had to give the keynote speech that night at mass meeting. He only had 20 minutes to prepare his speech.
We, the disinherited of this land, we who have been oppressed so long, are tired of going through the long night of captivity. Now we are reaching out for the daybreak of freedom and justice and equality. The only weapon that we have in our hands this evening is the weapon of protest. That's all. And certainly this is the glory of America with all of its faults. And we are not wrong. We are not wrong in what we are doing. If we are wrong, the Supreme Court of this nation is wrong. If we are wrong, the Constitution of the United States is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong.
We had never seen a crowd like that before. It took 15 minutes before the people would sit down, become quiet, and let us begin the meeting. And I can tell you the name of the first song that we sang. It was What a Fellowship, What a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms.
Before the boycott, 2/3 of the bus riders were black. After December 5th, there were almost no blacks at the segregated bus stops or on the buses. They walked, and they created a complex system that used private cars to carry thousands of people each day.
We asked for persons who had cars and would voluntarily put them in the transportation pool to let us know and what time they could be used. And in that way, we could know when we would have cars and where they had to go to pick up people. People would call in and say, I'm out here on Cloverdale Road in such and such a block, and I'll be ready at such and such a time. But this was being done all through the day, and we would know what time they were supposed to be picked up and where they were.
It was really surprising because we thought, well, maybe some of the people would continue to ride the bus. But after all, they had been mistreated and been mistreated in so many different ways until I guess they were tired, and they just decided that they just wouldn't ride.
The black community was inspired by its own success. They held meetings with the mayor and the bus company and found they could stand up to the city commissioners.
At first, we didn't even ask for desegregation. We only asked for a more humane system of segregation on the buses. And when they offered to grant that, then we realized that they wouldn't grant anything anyway, so we might as well ask for, complete desegregation. And that's what we went for, and we realized we had to go for broke, so to speak.
By this time, the boycott had lasted longer than anyone expected. A wave of violence started. Shots fired at buses. Bombs thrown at Martin King's home and Edie Nixon's home.
You've had some rather personal and trying experiences yourself. Are you afraid?
No, I'm not. My attitude is that this is a great cause, it is a great issue that we are confronted with, and that the consequences for my personal life are not particularly important. It is the triumph of the cause that I'm concerned about. And I have always felt that ultimately along the way of life, an individual must stand up and be counted and be willing to face the consequences, whatever they are. And if he is filled with fear, he cannot do it.
We thought that you could just shame America. So now, America, look at your promises, and look at how you're treating your poor Negro citizens. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. But segregation, you can't shame segregation. You can't, rattlesnakes don't commit suicide. Ball teams don't strike themselves out. You got to put them out.
The nightly mass meetings in church were the backbone of the boycott.
The mass meetings usually were attended by the maids and cooks and janitors and people who really used the buses a lot, and they would be there singing and praying for hours sometimes before the program actually started, the main part of the mass meeting.
I attended just about all of them. It was really very interested in it because you could go and you could learn about so many things that you didn't know exist, and so many people would tell you how they were being mistreated, and they were glad that they were able to come up and not have to take the same treatment that they once had taken and was afraid to admit.
The fear